Chapter 8. A big change happened in the nation of Israel. This chapter tells us how it started. The nation of Israel began with Abraham and Sarah and their only son Isaac. Genesis chapter 12, 15 to 18 and 21 to 22. Abraham's grandson Jacob went to live in the country of Egypt. He took 70 children and grandchildren with him. Genesis 46. 430 years later, in Exodus chapter 12 verse 40, all the Israelites left Egypt. In Numbers chapter 1 verses 1 to 50, they counted all the men over 20 years old. They were more than 600,000. Most of the men probably had a wife and children. So there may have been more than 2 million Israelites. God did what He had promised to Abraham in Genesis chapter 15 verses 1 to 6. The Israelites left Egypt. God chose Moses as their leader. When Moses died, God chose Joshua as their leader. Then Joshua died. God gave them judges as their leaders. But during all this time, God was their king. He ruled them. God knew that the Israelites would ask for a king one day. So God told them what their king should be like. Deuteronomy chapter 17 verses 14 to 20. Gideon was one of the judges. The Israelites wanted him, his son and his grandson to rule over them like a king. But Gideon said that God would rule over them. Judges chapter 8 verses 22 to 23. Now the Israelites asked again for the king. The Israelites asked for a king. At least 20 years had passed since the battle of Mizpah in chapter 7. The Israelites were happy with Samuel as their leader. But he was about 65 to 70 years old now. They did not know who would lead them in the future. Samuel still led the Israelites from Ramah, but his sons led the people who lived in the south of the land. The town of Beersheba is about 112 kilometers, that is 70 miles south of Ramah. Joel and Abijah were not good leaders. They wanted to get money rather than making fair decisions. They did not help the people. The Jewish law did not allow leaders to accept money for wrong judgments. Deuteronomy chapter 16 verses 18 to 20. Eli the priest had two sons who lived a bad life. The result was that the nation of Israel became wicked. Now Samuel had two sons who lived a bad life. Perhaps the leaders were worried that their nation would become wicked again. The leaders asked Samuel for a king. They said that they wanted to be like another nation. But the real reason is in verse 20. They wanted a man to rule them instead of God. God ruled them, but they could not see Him. They wanted a leader that everyone could see. They should have asked for a good leader who trusted God. The Israelites left God many times in the past. God had chosen them and saved them from all their enemies. They were happy for a while. Then they left God and worshipped other gods and idols. The Israelites liked Samuel, but they wanted to replace him with a king. They did not really refuse Samuel as their elder. Instead, they refused God as their king. Samuel knew this, and he was not pleased with the thoughts of Israelites. Samuel did the right thing when he prayed to the Lord. God told Samuel to warn the people. Perhaps they would change their decisions if they heard all the bad things about the kings that happened around the nations. Verse 20 tells us the real reason why the Israelites wanted the king. They wanted the king to fight against their enemies. They wanted a king to lead them to the war. But God led them when they went to war. They always won their battles when they trusted God, Yahweh. A human king cannot promise that he will always win wars. But the Israelites often forgot God because they could not see Him. Samuel warned them what a human king would do to them. He saw what the kings of the other nations did. A chariot is like a cart. 1 or 2 horses pulled it along. The army used chariots when they went to war. 3 or 4 men stood in the chariot. One man controlled the horses, the other men fought with the swords, arrows, or other weapons that they used during those times. Many times Samuel said, "He will take and he will make." A king would take a lot for himself and his friends and his servants. He would take all the best things. He would take people and animals. He would take crops and the lands. The people would have to pay taxes to him. This would be hard for them in the future. Sometimes they would only grow enough food to feed themselves. The people of Israel already had to give a tenth part to the animals and crops to the priest. Deuteronomy chapter 14 verses 22 to 29. Samuel knew that the king would demand all these things. This would make people unhappy. Samuel warned them of the disadvantages that would happen with a king. But the people could only think of the advantages. They would not change their decision. This was not the best for them, but God gave them what they asked for. However, in the future, God would not help them when they complained. They would get what they deserved. In the verse 22, the Lord said to Samuel, "You must give them a king." This does not mean that Samuel chose the king. God chose the king for the Israelites. Then the people went home to wait for their king. Perfume, in the verse 13, is a liquid that smells nice. People put it on their bodies so that they may smell pleasant. Grapes, verse 14, are fruit that people make into wine. Olives, verse 14, are fruits that contain oil. People press them hard and get the oil out of it.